I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
When we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
Foundations of society are fragile. We must be the shepherds of our own civilization.
If anyone answers either yes or no without making necessary distinctions, both are not telling the truth. They're lying.
Father, we pray that your word will become a hammer that breaks rocks into pieces. That you will raise up in this nation pulpits and prophets that will call the nation back to repentance.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently, or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah Initiative, conversation without compromise.
Yeah, thanks for being on here. I just finished reading the book this morning. So I read the Kindle version and I really enjoyed it. Honestly, I've wanted to have that friend group, a bunch of Arab friends to get coffee with and talk about politics for years at this point. So I got to live vicariously through your book.
Yes. You wish that you had formed that group yourself, eh?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. I've had some great conversations with some Arab friends,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of them are Saudi, and they never talk about things with each other. If you ask all the Saudis I know, if you ask them a question about religion or politics, the first thing they do is they look around to make sure there's no other Saudis in the room, and then they'll tell you.
Yes, I could have told you that. Yes. Yes. But may I ask you first, what is your own background, if you want to share it with me? I mean, religious-wise.
Yeah.
Religion.
Yeah. So basically, I grew up in a Christian home in a very secular part of England, and I started taking religion a lot more seriously when I was about 13, as far as being a Christian. So I read the Bible, decided I believed that it was true, did a lot of research. But then when I was like 19, I realized that most of my own interactions with religion and everything I knew about, say, Islam or Mormonism or other ideas, I'd only learn from people who agree with me. And I wanted to get beyond that. So I read the Quran, and then a few years later,
You read the Quran in Arabic?
No. Actually, yeah, once. Although I don't really speak Arabic very well. So I've read it twice in English, and I've listened to it all the way through in Arabic.
Well, that's a lot more than I did.
And then getting through the Quran, I realized I didn't understand very much about Muslims through that. So I decided I listened through on audio Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and just wanted to kind of understand how the Muslim world worked. And then I got through that and realized, okay, I know all this stuff, but I don't know any people. So I found the local Muslim Student Association here in Seattle, where I live, and I just started going as a non-Muslim, just listening, learning, asking questions, made a lot of friends. And then through that, we found out that we could have good conversations. That I expected it to be very standoffish, that there'd just be this irreconcilable disagreement and we wouldn't be able to talk about it. But I found that by listening, being willing to see people as individuals, that we were able to have great conversations where everyone could really be themselves. And I was able to invite other people into that. And now because of that, I now run a nonprofit here in Seattle where we facilitate friendship and worldview conversations between evangelical Christians and people from Muslim backgrounds.
That's very ambitious, yes.
And it's been a lot of fun. So tell me about your background and what made you want to write this book.
Well, I was born in Yemen, but Yemen is south and north, as you might know. and I was born in Aden, which is which was a British colony. So I kind of grew up in a somewhat British environment, and my schooling has been mostly English British. And my university was also Edinburgh in Scotland. So I'm Arab, but I'm very British in many ways. my wife is British as well. And of course, my family was a Muslim family. They're all very Orthodox Muslims. My younger brother and other members of my family I know probably pray 5 times a day, even today, even now. But I've been the black sheep of the family in that sense. I'm the eldest. What else would you like to know?
So, at what point? I'm curious now. Have you always just sort of naturally been the black sheep of the family, or is that something that's happened as you've grown older?
Well, when I say black sheep of the family, only as far as my belief in Islam, in religion, only in that sense, you understand? Because otherwise, I have been quite successful as a person. So, but my religious affiliation and practice of Islam has been next to nil. I mean, I don't pray or do the fasting Ramadan or any of that stuff.
So, reading the book, I kind of just had an ongoing assumption that Salah is the character that kind of represents you in this conversation.
Yes, many people have said that. Many people who have read the book have actually made that remark as observation. Yeah.
So,
because I trained in science myself. I'm a physician. I'm a doctor, a brain doctor.
So, yeah. So I read that about you, and then with Salah being a biologist, then I kind of figured that was at least part of your experience in there. So, how long has this book been in your head?
Oh, maybe just about 5 years, not much longer than that. And it came out at the end of last year. So it hasn't been there as a book. If you're asking me how long have you had these beliefs, that's a different question. Then we're talking about decades.
So what inspired you to write and publish this book right now? Because this isn't the first book you've written.
Oh, no. I've written 9 books, but they're novels. And, if you go to Amazon, you'll find all of them, just for you to know the titles. And also on a website called Smashwords. Are you familiar with that?
No, I've not come across Smashwords.
Yeah, Smashwords publish ebooks, that you can buy for $2, rather than Amazon, where you have to get the paper version mostly. So I have many of my books as ebooks because I figured that since many of them are in Arabic, or there are Arabic versions of my books, it'll be easier for people back home, and by home I mean Yemen and the Middle East, although my home now for the past 50 years has been Canada. Back home, they would be able to kind of download them for a couple of dollars and maybe read them, as opposed to get a paper copy, which is kind of difficult to purchase and transport all the way to a relatively primitive place like Yemen. The postal service is very bad.
So I'm curious, when you wrote this book, who do you hope is your main audience?
We've started the interview, I take it, have we?
Oh, yes, we have.
All right. Well, my audience, I'm hoping, is the young generation who are, like the age of my children or even my grandchildren, because that's, if you can achieve that, then you've achieved something. People who are in their 50s and above, they don't really change their opinions very readily. They've already formed them, and they formed them for good reason. They've studied the world like I did, and they came to a conclusion. Their conclusion is that, for example, that you must fast 30 days every time Ramadan comes along, and that is very important, and it's good for you, and it's going to take you to heaven. And I respect the fact that they believe that. That's fine. Yeah. So these people are very difficult to persuade otherwise. That's why we have to really educate the younger people.
And what are you hoping the biggest takeaway from this book is?
Of course, my main purpose is to break down the rampant hostility that exists in this world among different religions and those who believe in those religions. And everybody think that their religion is the best, and it has come from God, and therefore how can it be wrong? And yet they're going to wars, and they have no difficulty killing each other. Not only between and amongst religions, but even amongst different sects of the same religion, between Catholics and Protestants. 500 years ago, it was a huge war. Now it's Islam between the Sunnis and the Shiites.
And are those the lines that are currently kind of dividing Yemen right now? Is it mostly Sunni Shia, or is it a little more complicated than that?
No, the Sunni Shia divide is definitely there, because the Houthis are supposed to be Shiites, and the rest of the country is mostly Sunni. And my own family are Sunnis, Sunni background. But it is really a question of power. In the end, it's a question of power. You can use religion to achieve your power. If you can use some other means, you use other means. And that's what happens in countries that don't have any democracy. So you can use your title, you're a king or you're a descendant of a king or a prince, or you can use your religion to get to power, you can use your money to get to power. And it's all about fighting over power.
So why do you think the Middle East specifically right now has such a problem with fighting over power?
It is, that's a very good question. I think that the Middle East is going through what Western Europe and Europe in general went through 5 centuries ago. And so it's not really surprising that you have violence as a major issue in the Middle East, because there's no democracy. The idea of democracy has not penetrated the Middle East yet. people believe in, the descendants of a certain king have to be to rule the country, or the descendants of Prophet Muhammad. And I'm one of them, by the way. My family is descendants of Muhammad. That they are above everybody else because of that, and that therefore they should lead. And many of them are distinguished people. But to say that because I am a descendant of such person, then I have right to govern is completely anathema to democracy, at least Western democracy.
So, how much do you think religion in the Middle East plays into this belief of certain families have the right to rule?
Oh, a lot, a great lot. Example, you don't go very far. The MBS thinks that he has every right to be the next king of Saudi Arabia. No questions asked. And you destroy anybody that tries to get in the way. And I'm just using MBS as an example, but same thing is true of any of the Arab countries, apart from a few exceptions, like Tunisia, which has some fair degree of democracy.
Yeah, I had a lady called Tasneem Idris, who's part of the Islam and Liberty Network and has been pretty heavily involved in the Tunisian elections. So that is a very bright spot in the Arab Spring. So in order to get this change right, so one thing, a theme that almost all the characters in your book seem to agree on is that this change in the Middle East is inevitable at some point. So what do you personally think is the key to, from the Arab world going from where it is today to somewhere that's prosperous, free, people are able to live in peace?
Are you asking me how long it would take, or what would it take?
Both.
What?
I'm interested in what you have to say on both. How long you think it will take, and what do you think it would take?
Yes, it will take a hell of a long time. And what it would take is education, and by that I mean, I don't mean people getting PhDs and MAs and so on, but kind of secondary school level education in 90% of the population, so that the vast majority are clearly people who can think for themselves. What you need is to have people who think for themselves. And when you can think for yourself, you are able to challenge a dogma. So, no, I don't agree with you. That's not how it is. I think that, you argue like that with some science behind you, some experience behind you, some history that you have learned at school or at university. So it will take another generation at least, because not because the Arabs are stupid or because they are slow learners, because their leaders don't want them to get to that stage. And they will allow them to have the best cars and the greatest homes and the nice roads and all that, but they will not allow them to dabble in the discussion of democracy in their countries. That'll take a long time. And it is a form of self-preservation, if you like, on the part of whoever rules, because if you allow your subjects to understand democracy and to learn democracy and to spread democracy, you're really kind of digging your own grave in a non-democratic society.
So how would you answer somebody from the Arab world who's saying, okay, well, it's not right that you just copy the West. It's not working out very well for them. Why would you want that in Arab nations? Why should we copy the West instead of doing our own thing?
But that's a false argument. How is the West as bad as the Middle East? We have democracy in the whole of Europe, you know, varying degree, but definitely a huge amount of democracy. We have very good democracy in Canada, where I live. You have good democracy in the United States, in spite of what's happening right now. But in fact, what is happening right now is a sign of democracy. Otherwise, how can you have all this attack on Trump because, and he deserves it in my opinion, but I mean, it is a manifestation of democracy. And he will be defeated as well, I'm pretty sure.
And even if he wins the election, right, it's only 4 more years.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, so that's one thing that is interesting about your book. That even the Muslim character, even he seems to believe that democracy is the best option for the Middle East in the long run. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's true of most Arab Muslims, or do you think that's an unpopular idea?
I think it's getting to be a very popular thought or belief because people hear about it a lot on radio and television and podcasts like yours and so on. So I don't think that even the uneducated Arabs are walking around with blinkers on their eyes. I think they understand that it is important to move in the direction of democracy, but at the same time, they feel these same people, and even the people who are more educated, they feel that helpless. They feel helpless. They feel that whoever comes in to replace the people who are non-democratic right now will not be any better, or they will become despots with the passage of time. And you can't blame them because that's exactly what happened. You know, we have so many people who've been thrown out, like Saleh in Yemen, like Saddam in Iraq, like the guy in Syria, and whoever took over from them has not really been able to achieve democracy. But I think what they forget that you don't just jump from absolute dictatorship and brutality and horrendous system to a democracy like Germany or Canada. It doesn't happen that way. It happens in stages. It needs to have with it at the same time awareness, education of huge section of the population for it to establish itself and for it to last. Otherwise, you can switch from Mubarak to this guy Sisi. Okay, so if you change the leader, it's exactly the same system. In fact, it's even worse, maybe some Egyptians would tell you.
So a question that's kind of that represents more of what I believe here now, right? So in my experience, I meet a great deal of agnostic or atheist people from Middle Eastern countries, a lot of them. But
Where? In the States?
in the States, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't travel a great deal, but say, and there's a good amount of, say, atheist, agnostic Saudis that I'll meet.
Mhm.
And it seemed, looking at this from a Christian perspective, if you look at how Europe shifted,
Mhm.
I noticed at the end of your book, Samia said that there'll probably be some martyrs in the quest to transform the Arab world. And there certainly were in Europe. So when you're kind of introducing literacy on a wide scale in Europe because of people printing the Bible, you've got Hugh Latimer and Thomas Ridley, who are burned at the stake by Queen Mary for their work in spreading this kind of like literacy in Christian education. And Hugh Latimer turns to Thomas Ridley and says, take heart, brother Ridley, for today we'll set such a fire in England that by God's grace it will never be put out. So there's a roundabout way of asking a question, right? If in Europe, because people believed in the death and resurrection of Jesus and that they had the resurrection, it meant that they could be a little bit more cavalier with their lives because they believed they were dying for a greater good. And that they believe they're ultimately kind of rewarded for it and they're ultimately safe.
Mhm.
How would you think a secular person who's kind of agnostic to the afterlife, agnostic to where kind of ultimate right and wrong are, how do you think a secular person gains the strength to stand up even to the point of death to change things in the world?
I've never really considered that question. It's a very intelligent question. I think that the secular person has other assets, though, for the in the same way that the person who is religious has his own beliefs, and those beliefs help him or her see things in a certain manner. The person who is secular tends to be more familiar with science by definition, and therefore I think more logically, or at least he does not have the problem of religious dogma or religious belief getting in the way of thinking through a certain problem or thinking through the solution to a problem. So each party or each group have their own problems at reaching a decision about what to do in life and how to correct the situation. But I think in the end, the secular person does not have the threat of kind of death and damnation from above. That, if you don't follow the imam who has been chosen by Allah, therefore you are going to suffer in hell. The secular person thinks more logically and says, yes, I can do this. It might work, it might not work, but I still think that it's worth it. And you think logically, like mathematics, or at least logic, that if I do this, yes, true, I might be imprisoned, I might be executed, but my children will at least survive and have a better life. Or my people, a nation, will be able to do that. So I think a secular person is much better at achieving the aims and the result than someone who is hampered by religious belief, which can tie the hands of that person.
I can, but some pushback I'd give, in the spirit of the book, is that in the Reformation in Europe, what transformed Europe to what it is today, that it wasn't simply a straying away from religion. If you look at the call of the Renaissance, right, the phrase they use is ad fontes, right, to the sources. In that the idea is that years of tradition and human governments have added layers of useless things that are dead and useless on top of something that's true. And we want to go back to the originals, get rid of all the tradition, figure out the core of what's true, and then return to that. So in some people who want to do that are kind of going to go to the Greek classics and go in a kind of more sort of agnostic direction, but nevertheless they're trying to pursue some sort of truth for transformation, whereas the Protestant Reformation is going back to the source materials of the Bible rather than the tradition of the Catholic Church and using that to transform. And that's fundamentally how we got representative government, was through John Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland, then John Knox in Scotland, and then that spread to England and America from there, and then Germany much the same way. So it seems to me that secularism is not necessarily a set of beliefs, right? You could be secular and not care about the world, or you could be secular and care deeply about the world. What do you think people who are secular should be thinking about? The people who kind of agree with you in your basic worldview, what are the things you think they should be focusing on to make the world a better place?
Whether you are secular or not, I believe that you need, first of all, to believe that you are simply a one human being, that you are in this world for a limited period of time, and that you will disappear, and that you need to leave the world a better place than you found it, and that you need to mitigate, to reduce as much as possible the suffering of people who are not as fortunate as you have been in this world. And there is everything good to come from doing that. There's no downside to that. The only people who think that there is downside are those who are so insistent on wealth and more wealth and more wealth. And they don't care about other people. But I think the average person, actually, whether religious or agnostic or non-religious at all, they still care about their neighbors and their countrymen, their people who are suffering in a faraway country. People in Yemen may care about what's happening to the Rohingya, or what's happening to American blacks, and so on. There's no in today's world, which is so thoroughly connected with all sorts of technical machines and so on. We hear about each other, and so I don't think that religious people care about people any more than non-religious people. But the difference is that religious people tend to believe what, and I'm talking about the context of or in the Middle East, they tend to believe what their rulers claim. In other words, they're more likely to believe the Imam when he says that I am the descendant of so and so, and therefore I should rule you for the next, forever, or my descendants, my family will rule this country forever. Whereas the secular person will say, no, this is the world has changed. We need some democracy in Iraq and in Yemen and Sudan and Libya and Myanmar and all over the place. So does that more or less answers the question, or have I missed your?
That, I think what you just said is an area where I think you and I would be in agreement. That as I've explored the Arab world and the Muslim world in general, I think the thing that's holding back progress the most is this attitude of don't ask too many questions, just trust your leaders.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that is poisonous wherever I see that. And sometimes I see it in Christians, sometimes I see it in Muslims, sometimes I even see it in secular people, especially in my generation, right? I think someone like you, who's the first generation person who's secular, that you've had to question everything. You've had to do that to survive. You've had to be able to think. Whereas I think somebody who's third or fourth generation hasn't had to answer the same questions as what they've always known. And I think that asking these important questions and not just accepting what we've been raised in without questioning it is beneficial for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I agree with that.
So let's go here, right? So let's say somebody has read the book and they see the conversation between these four people and they think, I love this. I love to see people talking like this. I want to be a part of those kind of conversations. What advice would you give to somebody about making friends and talking to people from different perspectives?
Well, the advice that I would give based on my own experience, and which has been quite a few years because of my age, is that there is a lot more in common. You have a lot more in common than you think. And you are not going to find out about these commonalities if you do not explore them. And so I would suggest to younger people to actually take the initiative and go and talk to someone who is potentially your ally, or even if someone you already know ahead of time that he is not your ally, you'll find that he's not as bad as you thought, and that in fact you do have things in common. And we all as human beings have things in common, like mercy and love and compassion. And so try to find those things, and then through friendship you establish trust. And when you do that, then those areas where there's an overlap between you and the other person in, as I said, in compassion or mercy or truthfulness, you can expand on those things, because now you have established a degree of trust. The person knows that you don't want anything from them. You don't want any money from them, or any praise from them, or any jobs from them. And all you want is to simply air your own thoughts and your own beliefs. And it's very gratifying to find that there are people who think like you. We all have found that. And we also have found people who disagree with us. And is that in the Middle East, unfortunately, if people disagree with you, they become instantaneous enemies. And this is something that the Arabs have not learned, whereas the Europeans in general have. Why? Because the Europeans have been used to democracy for a few decades. Centuries, sorry, should be centuries. Whereas the Arabs have not. And so in parliament, or even at an interview on television, if you have the host and you have Mr. A and Mr. B on either side, and they're discussing Shiites and Muslims, or they are discussing human rights, or discussing polygamy, or homosexuality, whatever you like, any of these questions. They don't talk to each other and listen to the two different points of view and say, yes, I agree with you there, but I disagree on this point. They actually take their shoes off and they throw the shoe across the table to the other person. Have you seen that?
Yes.
I have seen it.
Yeah. I've always loved the video of that reporter who threw two shoes at George Bush, and he meticulously dodged both of them. Politics aside, for a man of his age, those kind of reflexes are impressive.
Mm. I think the whole world saw that film clip. Yes. Yes. But this is happening now when there's a debate on, say, television in Cairo or in Damascus or wherever.
I think really what's happening there is it's not just about the systems people are in, but it's about the kind of person people look up to. So personally, I think that the way many Muslims look at Muhammad is very similar to the way the Greeks used to look at Alexander the Great, in that they see the ultimate philosopher, the ultimate conqueror, and the ultimate governor. So the ideal in Europe for a long time was, okay, well, what is a great man? A great man is somebody who defeats his enemies on the battlefield, subjugates his political opponents, and is philosophically wise. So everyone is trying to be that and look like that until somebody who's better than them comes along and overthrows them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't overcome that until you replace that ideal of what greatness is with something different. And I think for Europe, that was putting the example of Jesus front and center, which leads to John Locke's letter concerning toleration, where he's appealing to, okay, well, Jesus defines greatness not by conquering others, but by self-sacrifice, by willingly laying down his life to serve other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to, and yeah, that's why, as you read, Canada, right, has Prime Minister as the title, meaning first servant, taken from the words of the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are some phenomenal servant leaders in the Arab world, but as you said in your book, they're in jails and they're currently suppressed.
Yes. Unfortunately, that is true. Yeah.
Well, our time for the show is up. But thank you so much for writing the book. I really enjoyed it. Where can people find that? And I'll link to it in the episode description so people can buy the book.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Where can people find your book?
So Austin Macaulay are the publishers, but I'm sure you can just type the name on Google and it'll lead you to where you can find it. But definitely I have it with Amazon, and I think Amazon is probably known to everybody in the world as far as as I know.
Yes, that's good, and some good PR for my hope for our base of operations here in Seattle, where we have Amazon headquartered. So, well, thank you for being on the show, and thank you guys for listening to the Almeida Initiative podcast. We will be back next week.